Hello, Eddie.
Hello, Àlex. Wonderful to connect with you again. If you recall, Àlex, last time we spoke, we were talking of the difference between outer poverty and inner poverty, and saying that to a hungry man, a starving man, a slice of bread is the face of God, as Gandhi put it. But in the Western world, we have enough bread and enough turkey approaching Christmas time on our plates. So obesity is very much a Western problem. But there is spiritual hunger. There is that inner poverty, which is not really satisfied by satisfying the belly or the outer world. And so much of our Western education emphasizes outward success. It's geared towards outer success at the expense of inner happiness. Now, the occult sciences, the perennial philosophy, has very little to do with the outer success, the outer world. It is concentrating on the inner world, the inner person, the inner being, because if the inner being is whole and healthy, like the roots of a tree that is healthy, then the fruit and the outer being will follow suit quite logically.
And when we say here inner, again, the usual way of understanding that means inside my body, inside my skull, my brain. That's why over and over we need to go and emphasize what we're talking about. And that's why I think the word occult, it's becoming more clear and precise as we discuss installment after installment.
That's very good. It's the hidden influences, the causative influences behind the outward manifestation.
So today we'll cover probably chapter 2 and chapter 3 of volume 2. Mm-hmm. These are juicy chapters. There are many terms, many distinctions, and I suppose the reader needs to read them and sit on them and then come back to them, because it's really structured, it's really rich, and you've summarized them in visual tables that are so handy. Let's do the best we can to unfold these terms. And chapter 2 is about the occult constitution of man. And chapter 3 is about the occult nature of man. And we had made the distinction between nature and constitution in chapter 1. Well, let's dive into it.
Definitely. Constitution and nature really is mirrored in medical science as anatomy and physiology. You act as you are as you act. Yeah. So yes, let's dive in.
All right, and already here we see the dual classification, the triple classification, the septenary classification. Now we're going to talk about the occult constitution. Let's concentrate on chapter 2. And it's quite beautiful to see like this duality, and then the combinations that are possible, and then leads to 3, and then leads to 7, and then the 7 unorganized. I mean, I'm rushing ahead, but this is a very quick overview of these 7 unorganized in triads and lower quaternaries and so on. So perhaps you could start by explaining why this unfolding, and then we can go and cover these seven modes or aspects, bearing in mind, and I suppose this will come back, that these are not layers, not onions. No. These are the human being is an organic whole, but you're going to describe these 7.
So let's just explain this unfolding from the unity. Firstly, we are a unity as always, but we can regard ourselves in terms of the individuality and the personality, or the higher self and the lower self. And these dual parts are not bolted together, we've agreed on that, but there are different modes in which we function. And there is a good reason, there are very good reasons why the individuality comprises the spiritual aspect, and the personality comprises the lower or physical aspect. But how do we go from sort of unity, duality, triplicity, and to the seven? Well, there's a very good reason, and it's strictly in accordance with mathematical law, because whenever seven entities are mentioned in esoteric literature or occult literature, it is because the seven entities came into being or into existence from three primary entities, which in turn unfolded from a duality, which in turn came from the unity. So we know from algebra, and this is indisputable, we know from algebra that the number of combinations of n things, where n is any number, the number of combinations of n things taken one at a time, two at a time, three at a time, four at a time, that equals 2 raised to the power of n minus 1, to the n minus 1. So the number of entities born out of a duality is 2 to the 2 minus 1, 4 minus 1, 3. 3 primary entities. Now, with those 3 primary entities, one can unpack them further. The number of entities born out of the triplicity is 2 to the 3 minus 1, 7. So there you have a clue that there are 3 primary entities and 4 secondary entities. So, for example, the colors of the rainbow, red, green, blue, are the primary colors, and the 4 secondary colors that have evolved from the 3 primary are red, green, green, blue. So in terms of body, soul, and spirit, the 3 primary principles are body, soul, and spirit. And they brought man into existence. But they coexist in him, with him, 4 secondary principles that are combinations of those 3 primary. So even though when we talk about it, it sounds detailed and complicated, it really is really simpler than one imagines. So the 3 primaries are the upper individuality, the spiritual, and the 4 are combinations that comprise our mortal personality.
This is already interesting for what's going to come next. We're not jumping ahead, but in chapter 5, right? When you're going to talk about death as a transition. Yes. Already here you mentioned in passing that some of these are immortal and the rest aren't.
Yes. The personality is that which is mortal, and that which is on the physical plane, on the earthly, on the terrestrial plane. And that is what physical science and physical medicine deals with. But the physical is the vehicle through which the higher principles work through and need to work through for destiny on earth.
Yes.
So it is like grounding an electric circuit, to use a very crude analogy. You've got to ground it. You've got to have the physical to ground it. Otherwise, it's just potential.
Yes.
So to go from a potential voltage or potentiality to actual current, using this crude analogy, you need an earthing.
Yes, and you're going to be using these images and these analogies throughout, and they're really interesting, like the one about the cinema and the projector, which I think will come soon. Okay, so we have the one into the duality, the individuality and the personality, right? Then that turns into 3, spirit, soul, and body. And then that unfolds into 7, which are in turn organized in 3 and 4. And that's why, again, the table is so useful to navigate them.
Yes.
Should we dive into the seven, and perhaps you can say something about them without getting into much detail?
It'd be useful always to talk about the seven in terms of the three and the four.
Yes.
So 3 and the 4 immediately implies the duality and the triplicity, which is the connecting principle between the 3 and the 4.
Yeah.
So the 3, of course, are in Sanskrit known as Atma, Buddhi, Manas, and now we have to resort to English. But it's so much easier to understand a new word when one sees the etymology. If it's just rote memory, it's useless. It doesn't help. What does Atma mean? The root, it means divine self in English, but the root means an, which is to breathe. So what's doing the breathing? It's the universal selfhood, the highest part of ourselves, which is breathed forth, so to speak. Now, who does the breathing? The word Brahma, the origin, bri, means to breathe out. So Atma is the divine breath in us, so to speak. It's the highest, it's the divine self. So it's that essential and radical faculty or power which gives to every entity its sentient consciousness. And if Brahma were to utter the word I, that I would be the Atma. So Atma is a completely universal principle. It belongs to no one, or it belongs to everyone. You cannot possibly say my Atma and your Atma. It's like saying my bit of the sunshine and your bit of the sunshine. The sun shines on everything, all horrible creatures, all beautiful creatures.
Before we move forward, and again, this can get technical, but this way of expressing it, the breathing out, how to think about that? Is it an emanation? Technically, how does that happen? And I know it's a stupid question because this is not about tell me the mechanism, but what's a more, if you wish, more philosophically sophisticated way of thinking about that breathing out?
How does that happen? Think of it as a radiation. How does the sun shine? It radiates. And you can go into the physicality of radiation, but it's in the very nature of the sun to radiate.
Yeah. I have many questions. I hope I won't overwhelm you with them today. No. Maybe it's like one per each of these 7 principles. And so why? Well, here there's the second one for Atma. So it radiates, it breathes out. Why? What for?
Because it's in its own nature to do so. Why does a rose emit beautiful perfume? It cannot help it. It's let's say it's the principle of outpouring, of emanation. And, as Schiller said, the universe is a thought in the divine mind, but this ideal thought form has overflowed. So it's the overflowing of that universal mind.
Right. Thank you.
So then the second of the 3 spiritual principles is what we call buddhi. And that's the principle of intuition or discrimination. Now, quite logically, such a high principle like Atma can't directly contact the physical level. So it has to take on attributes, so to speak. So the buddhi, known as the spiritual soul, is the principle of intuition, which comes really from the Sanskrit word buddh, which is to enlighten, to awaken. And of course, the Buddha was the enlightened one, the awakened one. So Buddhi is the highest faculty of discrimination and intuition in the individual. That faculty which directly knows, not knowing through the intellectual mind, it's a direct perception, a direct knowing. So Buddhi is not the same as intellect or reason, but it is the nucleus or the germ behind the thinking, the mind. And the third, but Buddhi can't contact Earth directly, so it has to work through its own vehicle, so to speak, its own attribute, which is manas, mind. And the mind principle comes from the Sanskrit word man, to think, to cogitate. And this causes no end of confusion. When we use the word man, we don't mean the male gender, we mean the thinking person. So manas, the mind, springs forth from buddhi as the fruit from the flower. And these are the three higher principles, so to speak, which take on mortal vestures. Sorry,
allow me to go even a bit slower. No, I enjoy it totally. So if we go back to buddhi, something that caught my attention is, well, first, the claim that there is direct perception, because that's something that the neurosciences, and not only the neuroscience, like the mechanic philosophy that has dominated science for 400 years, there's no such thing, or it's not possible to have direct perception. So that's pretty remarkable. But at the same time, this power or this plane or this mode allows for discernment. So it allows for difference. I mean, I'm curious about that. Here's my question. Because we speak about wholeness and unity, but really up there, second level of this hierarchy, right. There's a power of making differences, right? Discernment.
Yeah, sure. By discernment, we mean here distinguishing the true from the false, distinguishing an appearance from the reality behind the appearance. As Einstein so beautifully said, and this has been recorded by Leopold Infeld, one of his great biographers, that science can talk about, well, relative truth, because that is dealing with the appearances behind realities. But the real truth is only known to the universal observer. So the discernment concerns seeing the real truth behind the various appearances that cloud or masquerade that truth. We're not saying the appearances are nonsensical, but there are distortions, like a cloudy window that distorts or clouds the light coming in.
Yes. And from this power, I think you imply from intuition, then later on reason and intellect and other faculties.
Sure. But, talking of direct knowing, what about the great Ramanujan, the mathematician, who had virtually no mathematical training? He had that direct knowing. Now, how that came is another question.
Yes.
But it certainly wasn't through book knowledge.
Yes. Now, the third, let's go now to manas again. And let me ask you here, because you're right, this is what distinguishes us from the mere animal.
Yes.
So animals don't have manas. Does it mean they stay in the lower quaternary and don't make it to the fifth, the sixth, and the seventh?
Yeah. The spiritual soul, so to speak, is only potential in them. The animal would have mind, let's call it that, but the animal would not know I have mind. The animal would not make that discernment, that distinction. If you train it, of course, you can train it in a certain way that don't bite him and bite her. But the animal would not have that quality of discernment, that quality of self-understanding. it would never say, if it could talk, it can never say I'm a dog as distinct from a cat. It would be in its own pure being. And unfortunately, we say very unkindly to the animals, don't behave like an animal. Well, I would rather say to many human beings, I'd say to the animal, please don't behave like that human being.
Yes. Yes. Well, that was kind of the other side of the coin of the question that I wanted to ask you, which is, well, let's not talk about animals. What about those humans who we often seem to be not very humane? Is it because this third element is, I suppose it's not missing, but it's just not expressing? What happens when humans become unhuman?
Animal-like.
Animal-like, but not even that. Yeah.
That's a huge part of occult science, which I've explained in chapter 5. It's to do with the antakarana, which is the linking, the umbilical cord between the higher and the lower. So just now, very simply, if the higher self, or the spiritual nature, be likened to a parent, and the lower nature to a child, when the parent loses control, the child runs amok, as every parent knows. So you've got to restrain the child. So those people who display more animal-like qualities, I'm not saying animal-like qualities, that connection, that antakarana, that umbilical connection is not, well, it's pretty thin and it's pretty ineffectual. And that is a tremendous, and I really mean that, a tremendous insight of occult science that conventional psychiatry and psychology really doesn't, without sounding arrogant at all, have a clue.
Yeah.
But those who do have a clue are the great writers, Àlex, and the great poets. And one of the greatest examples in literature is Robert Louis Stevenson, The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde.
Well, thank you for mentioning that. We won't go into.
We'll come to that.
Yes, we won't go into more detail, but these are kind of invitations for. Yes, wonderful. All right, number 4. Now we enter into the mortal constitution.
Sure. Just talking about the mind, a crucial teaching of occult science is that mind is one, of course, but it displays 2 aspects, which we call the higher mind and the lower mind, which can be correlated to Ian McGilchrist's left brain and right brain, but without taking that too literally. So consciousness is one, but it is the same mind using both hemispheres of the brain as its vehicle, can operate in 2 different ways. It can either aspire to the higher nature, or it can gravitate to the lower nature. So it can aspire to that which is altruistic, philanthropic, unselfish, kind, and all of that, or it can gravitate and attach itself to the selfishness, the personality, I want it for myself. It doesn't mean it's wrong to think of yourself. I mean, you don't think of yourself at the expense of others. If you don't think of yourself, you wouldn't live. You wouldn't run your family. I mean, it's just common sense. But when the center of gravity of our being, so to speak, is centered in the lower self, that the whole world revolves around me. The world is my oyster, and I only live because of the world can do for me. On the other hand, you can turn that around and say, what can I do for the world? And what I'm doing for the world will undoubtedly help me because I'm part of the world.
Are you talking now about the transition between 3 and 4?
Yes, exactly.
Yes. Yeah. Like whether you're more right below the threshold or right above.
That's right. So the 4th principle then is called karma. C-A-M-A, not to be confused with karma, C-I-R-M-A, which is the desire principle. And karma is really the motivating principle in life. And it's the impelling force in life. And in the human constitution, karma is you might call it the seat of the animal impulses and passions. And it's the center of the desires and aspirations considered in their energetic aspects. Now, no one is saying that desire is evil. It depends what you're doing with your desire. Life would be impossible without desire, but what are you desiring and who are you desiring it for? So the whole point of desires is if you block them, that's like putting a boulder in a roaring stream. You create huge problems. But if you gratify them, you just create a tremendous flood all over the place. So the whole point is to manage desires. And the union of desire and the lower mind is the pivot point which attaches the higher self to the mortal self. It's known as kama manas, the desire mind.
Mm-hmm. Like a hinge.
It is exactly like a hinge. And it is a cardinal error, as I said just now, to regard desires as evil. That's very much part of sort of religious instruction gone wrong, of course. Desires are sinful, and that's rubbish. How beautifully Khalil Gibran put it, the mystic always puts it beautifully, that your reason and your passion are the rudder and the sail of your seafaring soul. Why seafaring? It's a journey. And why the sea? Emotion, water. Now, reason or mind is your rudder. But what's the use of a rudder without sails, without passion to move your boat? But that's not enough. It's not enough just to have a rudder and to have sails. Where are you steering? Who is doing the steering?
Mm-hmm.
The steering is done by the higher self, by the buddhi.
Yeah, I see.
So, and what's the boat? The boat is the body that you're steering in the direction you need to go under the command of your higher self, with the control of your mind principle, powered by your passion.
Now, kama,
kama,
in this mode number 4, you made some notes that seem to relate it to dream consciousness. Can you comment on that?
Dream, well, that's the known as the Mayavi Rupa. That's in chapter 3. But since we're talking about it now, Mayavi is obviously a Sanskrit word deriving from Maya, illusion, and Rupa means body. So the Mayavi Rupa is the body of thoughts, and therefore it's called the dream consciousness, which after death becomes the Kama Rupa, the desire body, which is the source of the apparitions and the spooks and the so-called materializations we see.
Yeah, I see. All right. Can I ask one more?
One more thing, Kama. Yeah. The one, since you mentioned after death states, the first after death state is known as Kama Loka. Loka means place, but Loka means a region or circumscribed place. In metaphysics, of course, it's not. It's a state of consciousness. It's not a geographical location or world, obviously. And all of these words signify a certain state of consciousness. So every loka has its corresponding tala, its nether pole. And the Kamaloka is really the same as the Purgatorio in Dante's immortal Divina Commedia, the Divine Comedy.
Mm-hmm.
And it also, of course, has the equivalent words in Christianity and in the Greek Hades, for example.
Mm. All right, let's move to number 5.
Yes, number 5 is prana, meaning, again, the origin of the word is important. It's from the verb an, pran, an, again, to live, as in atma, but here we're talking of a more material level of breath. So it's the life force or the vital breath. It is the chi of the Chinese, it's the fu of the Japanese, and it is the vital principle or life force that pervades and animates the physical body, and it's necessary only to the mortal elements.
You indicate that it's related to the electromagnetic field.
Yes,
in a way.
That's right. Yes.
I wonder, I mean, this is so interesting, and I think we'll come back to it in future conversations, because I'm also, as we're discussing, I'm trying to see how science as it's practiced could just rise up. Yes. So if it's related to the electromagnetic field, but I understand it's not only that, it's something non-physical. How to even conceive that coupling? Because that would be a discovery. Well, perhaps a discovery already made by occult science. But if exoteric science could work on it, that seems to be the place to do so.
My first thought is acupuncture, because I'm not saying that's directly related to prana as such, but the meridian system of the body. You certainly can't see it using X-rays or MRI. It's on the etheric body. So acupuncture has everything to do with stimulating the energetic system and removing blockages, and to enhance, therefore, the free flow of prana. Now, I think Motoyama is the Japanese scientist who comes to mind who's invented a device quite clinically to test the activity, let's say, of the acupuncture points on the fingertips and the toes and the other centers. So that might be a partial answer.
Thank you. Yeah. And so you just mentioned we have the etheric body. Yes. Then soon we'll talk about the astral body, and then we have the physical body.
Yeah, the astral is a very unfortunate term that's used all over the place.
Yes, totally. Yes.
In one sense, the astral is all the non-physical bodies between the physical body and the spiritual. It's used in that sense. But, it's such a wide term. So the etheric body is a much more focused term. Well, again, the Sanskrit word is linga sarira. Linga means model, and sarira means that which wastes away, that which withers away. So the linga sharira is the model body which withers away. So it is the double of man. So just as a photographic positive print needs a negative, the linga sharira, let's call it the etheric double, is the negative upon which the physical body is constituted. So it's the causative field, if you like. It's the causative field, and here you have electromagnetism again, which radiates the energies that enable the physical body to be builded up. And to that extent, it precedes the existence of the physical body, and it exists for a little while after the death of the physical body, which is why sensitive people see this gray, misty shape around a newly deceased person.
Yeah. And as I was trying to connect it with science again, talking about this one. This causative field reminded me very much of Rupert Sheldrake's idea of how to explain form and these morphic fields, or this idea that would help explain how organisms know what shape, the problem of, what shape do they take, and also then the problem of memories. So I suppose it's very related to that, right?
It is. It is certainly related to that, Àlex. And it is a mystery of why organisms take up the shape that they have. Now, you can relate shape to sacred geometry, of course. Every shape implies structure, implies weight, implies function. But a shape ultimately implies purpose, teleology, goal-directed purpose. And that's a word science hates. Goal-directed purpose. No, everything's deterministic. You start from one free miracle, and the one free miracle, as Rupert Sheldrake states in his book, quoting Terence McKenna, the one free miracle is all the laws of nature that came into being suddenly. Once we know that, predict everything else. There is a lot of very interesting research, in my opinion, trying to bring together morphogenetic fields, the prana, the etheric double, and all of that. That is very interesting. And when one does research, you can't get the definitive ultimate answer. You are on a journey. But when people start picking holes on the smallest little detail, well, it's not fair. It's not good science, because there are bound to be errors, but we are moving in one direction as we are exploring.
Well, and so far...
In the same way, is when you're learning a piece of music, you play wrong notes. There's nothing wrong with wrong notes, as long as you correct them.
Yes. And I was going to say, so far, everything we've discussed, we haven't yet reached to 7, which is the physical body. So we haven't reached the domain of the orthodox sciences, again, as we know them.
Sure.
So all it's like unknown territory.
But the physical body, again, the Sanskrit word is satula sharira. Sarira is that which withers away, which of course the physical body does. Satula means gross, heavy, bulky. Therefore, the satula sharira is the bulky, coarse body that withers away, which is exactly what the physical body is. But it is in that sense, in every sense, it is the meeting point of all the 6 principles above it, without which they would have no vehicle to manifest on earth. It is the basis of the integration of the 6 principles. But the physical body is also a conveyor of millions of countless little lives, the millions of cells that are working out their own destiny through the physical body. And the physical body is an expression of divine intelligence. It is not to be despised, because it is a miniature copy of the universe in that sense.
Why do you say it's the most unreal, despite being real?
Well, in relative terms, it's the most unreal, because even when the physical body is taken away, consciousness is sometimes even more alive. So it is the most transitory. So I'm saying the more transitory, the more unreal.
Here comes a hard question. Is it transitory also in an evolutionary sense, meaning that when cosmic evolution continues, at some point we won't need it? What does perennial philosophy say about it?
Yes, it does. But even before the physical body took on the constitution it does now, there is a tremendous amount that's stated about human consciousness in more ethereal bodies, let's say, in races, in prehistoric races, in the midst of antiquity, that were human in a sense, but not working and reproducing through the physical body that we now have, because humanity is a state of consciousness. It's like a phase state. So the physical body is one of the vehicles that humanity is using in its present state of evolution.
So in the future, it will be in the future, will it be set aside, or will it be transformed, or maybe none of these?
Well, in the future, I would say our physical vehicle is likely to be more etherealized, like it was before it became concretized. So in a sense, we are cycling backwards in order to cycle forwards. But there, Àlex, if only people would read their Bibles with, a bit more of an esoteric eye, we read that the Lord God formed man out of the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and then the man became a living God. Now, the Lord God, well, you can say the divine principle, formed man out of the dust. You need the material principle, the physical body. But he breathed into his nostrils, well, you think of prana there, the breath of life. And the man became a living soul. When the man becomes a living soul, it means he displays the quality of buddhi, the spiritual soul, and the human soul, manas. So allegorically, the Bible, and other great works, of course, contain that wonderful wisdom.
Okay, well, thank you for walking slowly with us, despite just flying over the 7. And again, a reminder to the reader, table 2-4 in page 31, summarize it really well, at least these words and concepts of chapter 4, the constitution of man. Should we move to the occult nature of man of chapter 3 now?
Yeah, sure.
Yes, all right. More Sanskrit terms, and don't be apologetic about them. You are in the book, but at the same time, you say, well, if you want to learn physics, you need to know mathematics, and or if you're a philologist, you need to learn subtle words. So,
so in terms of nature and function, as we explained at the last session, for anything to function, you need at least 2 principles. So, for the finger to move, you need the finger and the hand to which it's joined. You can take that at any level. So there've got to be at least 2 principles at work. One is the active principle, and the other one is the passive principle, to enable the activity to occur. So very crudely, the flow of water in a pipe, that's action. Flow of water in a pipe, action. It requires the active principle, the flow, and it requires the pipe, the passive principle, to enable it to happen, enable it to function. So the subtlety of Sanskrit is the way they distinguish between the static and the dynamic.
And that's why at the beginning of chapter 3, I suppose, you explain to us these 4 terms, kosa, upadi, vahana, and soul. And you help us with that translation, right? Respectively, sheath, base, carrier, conveyor.
Yeah.
Because now, again, as a reminder, because we're talking about the nature, the occult nature, not the occult constitution,
right.
We're going to be talking about the processes, the physiology. And for that, you set these, metaphors or these translations that we understand that there's a carrier and there's a vase and there's a conveyor, an intermediary. So do you want to say something about these 4 before we, perhaps we don't need them to go through the 7, but
no,
we can do it much later. Yes, but to convey this idea of, we're talking now about occult physiology and what's needed to grasp it well.
Sure. Well, kosha means a sheath, where the various principles, this is a Vedanta term, are regarded as sheets or coverings, but again, as we said, not as onion skins, but the various faculties through which we operate. So it's obviously a purely metaphorical statement, standing for aspects and states of consciousness. So the first sheath is called Annamaya Kosha. Now, just earlier, I mentioned the physical body as Sathula Sharira, the bulky, coarse thing that wastes away. In terms of our nature, how do we exist? We need food. So Annamaya Kosha is just another way of referring to the body. Anna means food, and Maya Kosha is the illusory body. So Annamaya Kosha is the first sheath that exists on food. So that's the overall meaning of kosha, a sheath considered in that sense. Now, upadhi means a base or a deposition, something that signifies standing in place of. So it's a veil that stands in place of something. So if you project light from a cinema screen, from a projector onto a screen, the upadhi is the screen upon which the light is projected. Now, no amount of fiddling around with the screen would affect the nature of the light. But the cleaner the screen, the more purer the pictures will be, of course. So that immediately tells us that the more we purify that upon which the divine light is deposited, our various subtle bodies and physical bodies, the more we refine them, the more we can capture and mirror faithfully the divine nature. So again, in terms of occult anatomy, if you like, the lower mind is the upadhi, the deposit, the screen of the higher mind. So the more clean, the more unconditioned, the more calmer the lower mind, the screen, the deposit, the better the higher mind can mirror its true nature.
Let me make a comment here, because perhaps it will help clarify what we're talking about and also clarify my thoughts about it. Because as I was reading chapter 3, only towards the end, I thought, okay, what Edi is doing here is, after having talked about these 7, concentrate on how they may interact or in the transitions between them, right? Mm-hmm. Is this, because then when you mention the 7 corresponding to this chapter, it's always kind of the one and the other, and how you would do that movement of connection. Is this what you mean by this occult physiology primarily? How the planes, they're not planes, but how these modes, right? These aspects are talking to each other, if I can put it this way.
Yes, most certainly. How they are communicating with each other, that is vital. Yes, that is absolutely vital. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And how each has its role within its context, but how they're also communicating with their neighbors.
Is it always sequential, meaning can 7 talk to 5 without 6, or 4 to 2 without 3 in between?
That's a very good question. My first response would be probably not, unless one is a master or an adept, which I wouldn't obviously know about.
Mm-hmm.
But can you? Well, look. Yes, look. In this sense, a master of mathematics can talk to the primary school children, but the primary school children can't talk to at the level of the master. Let's put it that way. So the 5 can step down to the level of the 2, but the 2 wouldn't understand the 5 without having to go through 3 and 4.
And maybe a related question to this: what happens with these truly, how to say, elevated beings, or sometimes they're called avatars in India?
Avatars.
I'm thinking of Sri Aurobindo, and by the way, today is the Mahasamadhi of the Mother. Mm-hmm. So how to think about their physiology, occult physiology? What makes them so extraordinary?
I think what makes them so extraordinary, Àlex, is that the personal is completely aligned, and the word aligned is so important with the higher, because we all know, at least I certainly know, that some moments in life I'm very much in tune with, say, my higher nature. What I mean is there's no conflict, there's no if or but or should it be or should it not be. It's just as it is. At other times, one is confused and the mind is scattered. So with these advanced souls, they are completely immersed in the higher nature. And so interesting you mentioned the mother. My aunt was a great, she would never use the word devotee, but because that implies you're stuck to one person. But she was very drawn to the mother, and she had 2 audiences with the mother.
Wow.
And
wow.
I have in my bedroom a little inscription that the mother wrote for my aunt.
Wow.
And the inscription says, always remain young, never desist from striving towards perfection. I've got that in front of my bed. Think of the wisdom of that. Remaining young, it doesn't mean you behave stupidly. We know that. We recover the childlike state that thou lost, as the Bible says, that curiosity, that innocence, that not I know it all, I want to find out. And never desist from. You can never reach perfection. How boring if you did. But like the mathematical asymptote, always try and approach the perfect more and more closely.
Yeah, yeah.
I'll send you, if you're, I'll send you a screen capture of that. It's a beautiful word.
Please. Yeah, I also feel very drawn to both of them.
Yeah. Yes, Sri Aurobindo and the mother. Yeah.
Yeah.
I visited his the ashram in Pondicherry.
So did I. And did you go up Did you go up to the room? The physicality there is different.
It is. A lot of people experience it differently. My aunt would say there was that incredible feeling of sudden drowsiness. Other people will experience it differently. Yes.
Yes. Wow. All right.
So we've dealt with Koshar, the sheath, so-called, Upadi, the base, that which stands as a bearer, as a veil. And Vahana is just a vehicle, so insofar as the base is a dynamic base, it becomes a vehicle. So, for example, the wire, electric wire, is an upadi, but when current flows through it, it's a carrier, so it acts as a vahana, a vehicle. You can say this is hair splitting, but we only hair split for certain reasons. We're not just doing it because we like to split hairs.
No. When you go to university to study any subject, exactly. I can speak about physics because that's when study any subject. You divide into calculus and electromagnetism 1 and electromagnetism 2. And then when you're there, they tell you about these concepts and the potentials and the forces and the curls and the gradients. And I hope we're doing the same here.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
And soul, as we explained the other day, is this generic term that touches at the upper pole spirit and at the lower pole body and matter. So depending on the nature of the person, the soul quality will display either the spiritual nature or the lower nature. But the soul is a transformer. It transforms the divine current to a level that the body can handle.
Yeah.
But in another sense, and in equally important sense, a soul is also, you can regard it as a reflection of the spirit. So using the analogy of a mirror, only a fraction of sunlight can be caught by the mirror. But the cleaner the mirror, the less dusty the mirror, the more perfect will be the image. So it follows that a physical man will display the quality of his soul. And the eyes are the windows of the soul.
Now, in these descending cascades, we won't go into detail, but they're there in chapter 3, from 1 to 2 to 2 through 3, and so on. I wonder if there's any flow upwards. So if the lower levels can also affect, influence, change the upper levels. The relevance of ascend, not so much descend.
I would say there is every chance of ascent because the lower levels are imbued with the highest levels. So there is every opportunity to unpeel the coverings, because if the lower did not, if Atma did not pervade's a nice word, everything. It pervades, but it doesn't step down. And in an article I wrote on a completely different subject, I used the analogy, and just the analogy, of the British monarchy. And I said, in a sense, the Queen, well, I wrote it when Her Majesty was alive, the Queen, in a sense, pervades the nation, but she doesn't step down to our level. She maintains her height, but we are pervaded by the regal essence.
Yeah, thank you. Because again, the spatial tendency to put them in layers, as you warned us in the previous.
That's right.
And so they fall down and what falls up. But no, they're already there as we find them.
They're already there.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. Well, I have another question that I'm sure it will recur in the future, so we'll have time. I'm curious about other entities. Like we spoke about animals, we spoke about humans. Are there other entities right here, right now, that are inhabiting these, that have this constitution and this physiology somewhat different than us?
You mean non-physical entities or either?
Well, look, if I draw a lot from analogy here, and I come from the physical science and the biological science. So if I was a taxonomist or a zoologist, or a ethologist, I would go and I say, look at their species and their taxa, and within them the organisms, and some have homologies at the genetic level, at the physiological level. If I look at brains, they have conserved structures. And so I could imagine and perhaps I could speculate about other species not yet discovered, but that may probably exist, and they will be similar in this way, or perhaps absolutely different in another way. And we find this in the natural world all the time, and we have also the vegetable kingdom and also fungi.
And other discoveries, yes.
So I'm trying to conceptualize what may be out there in this ecology of entities. It's not just the human, it's not just man as we're talking about.
Well, there is the human kingdom, but there are other kingdoms, and there are the elemental kingdoms, as they're called, and there are the whole kingdoms of what are known as the nature spirits, which have very different constitutions and evolutionary destinies. But just talking at the biological level, I think I mentioned in volume 1, there was a species discovered in one of the lakes in America, where the essential building block was arsenic and nothing to do with our genetic material.
Yes. Yes.
And NASA said this is life as we don't know it.
Yeah.
So I would say to you, Àlex, that there is a phenomenal amount of life around which we haven't discovered, and which, if we did discover, would totally confuse us. And I think we have a natural inbuilt filtration mechanism that only lets in what we can handle.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, well, I would ask you more about that, but I think let's leave it there, and hopefully we can come back when it's the right time. So I think this covers quickly, but pretty much chapter 3. What should we do? Do you want to say a few words about chapter 4? Should we wrap it up?
Well, if you like, let's deal with chapter 4. But just before that, let me just address this whole question of should we use 2, should we use 7? In context. Now, just think of a very familiar life situation. If a person, I'm not going to say if a person finds himself in a rage or driven by lust and in a state of terrible temptation, the dual constitution is more than enough. Am I going to behave like an animal immorally? Or am I going to restrain myself and draw on my spiritual nature? The dual is more than enough. If a person is a homeopath or a Tai Chi teacher or teaching Qigong or a genuine healer, then it does help to know about prana and the etheric double and the other constitution. So depending on the context, 2 is enough. If I have to make a decision like that, or if I want to operate as a Tai Chi healer or in other ways.
This makes a lot of sense. As above, so below. And in the sciences, this idea of modularity and also coarse graining is super important in complexity science. And you can break them in 2 and then so on. And then you can choose what level of coarse graining you wish to be, and also that affects what kind of interventions you can make. So it sounds really reasonable, and thank you for drawing that to these levels. Yes.
Thank you.
Now, chapter 4 is about man's 3 primary vehicles, vehicles of consciousness. And before you comment on it, so here the word consciousness appears. That didn't appear so much in the previous 2 chapters, because we talked about mind and soul and spirit. Help us see this constellation again. Well,
they're all aspects of consciousness, but vehicles of consciousness, now that's to bring in the dynamic aspect. We have centers of consciousness, but the center operates through its chosen vehicle.
Yeah.
And the 3 vehicles are, well, the auric egg, the auric envelope, the causal body or the karmic body, and the mortal vesture, the terrestrial personality. So the auric egg is a very, very sacred subject. It's really that envelope, that egg-shaped ovoid, the envelope, which is the source and basis of all other vehicles. And that's in one of the tables, of course. And it is really the mirror which really sensitive people and clairvoyants perceive. And what you perceive is the real man, not the person as he appears to be or wants to be seen. It shows you really who you truly are. So the substance, for want of a better word, of the auric vehicle or the auric egg is drawn from Akasha. And Akasha now is a term that is really pervading, I like that word, science, as in that wonderful book by Ervin Laszlo, Akasha, the womb of all the elements and the memory of nature. So the substance, if you like, of the auric envelope is drawn from Akasha, and thereby it is the preserver and recorder of karma, the universal law of compensation. And it's also the storehouse, if you like, of the good and bad powers in man. And the second vehicle is the causal or karmic body.
So they are expressing consciousness, they are unfolding consciousness. What is it that they're doing?
Well, they are vehicles of consciousness. Well, unfolding in the sense as they are enabling that which is potential to work its way through in the destiny of each one of us.
Mm-hmm.
They are the sheaths of consciousness in that sense, using the word sheath in that sense, of course.
This distinction in 3, does it have analogs of 2 and 7?
Insofar as you can break up the 3, the mortal, into the 4, yes. But again, the 3, we've said that many times, that things seem to go in main groups of 3, and for very good reason.
Do you have any hope that these teachings can feed back into neuroscience, into the neuroscience of consciousness? Or you would say, no, leave it alone?
No, I would never want to be pessimistic. Could it fit into the physicality of neuroscience? Probably not at this stage, Àlex.
It's like if people are studying tectonic plates,
yeah,
and should they be concerned about genomics, right? Or any other aspect of biology? Maybe they can do without it, or at some point we will need this.
Well, again, what are you doing in neuroscience? If you want to be a top brain surgeon, it's not necessary. You've got to understand the physics and the physicality of the organ you're operating on. But thinking of Ibn Alexander and his incredible experience and his first book, Proof of Heaven, if as a neuroscientist you're trying to talk about consciousness and you say that this is all there is to it, then I would say look a bit further. How can an organ that is essentially, in physical terms, chemistry and biology, express and do everything that you claim it can do? So in that sense, neuroscience needs to shake hands with occult science, but one can't take the place of the other.
Mm-hmm.
There needs to be handshaking.
Yeah, I like that. So where are we?
When we shake hands, we're connected.
Where are we now? Sorry. So where are we now?
We talked about the
core. Yeah.
Yeah, we talked about the auric envelope. The causal body is the next one, and we talked about the spiritual soul, buddhi. The causal body is the vehicle of that spiritual soul, and it's also called the reincarnating ego for that reason, because it is the basis of the cause, and for that reason, being the basis of the cause, it's also called the karmic body. And its radiation, so to speak, is known as the Algoides, the luminous self, described by the English politician and occult writer Bulwer Lytton. And it can sometimes, we're told, make an appearance as a formless body of light, or even convey information. But what it conveys, of course, because it is really an expression of divine intelligence, but what it conveys is, of course, of an utterly impersonal nature, nothing to do with the personal life. And I think the sooner people realize that the higher self is not one bit interested in your personal comfort, only in your growth, which is a hard lesson. Your personal comfort means nothing to the higher self. It's only your growth. And if that means discomfort, so be it. Which doesn't mean the higher self believes only in discomfort, far from it. But we like to think of personal comfort as, well, we're progressing, you're getting somewhere, we're happy. That's a very low benchmark.
Yeah. So the notion of progress.
Yeah. So again, it's important not just to use words, but to show how they relate to the great religious traditions. The Argoides, the luminous self, the radiation, if you like, from the causal body, it's known as the Amesha Spentas in the Zoroastrian tradition, and Amesha Spentas are the equivalent of the archangels in Christianity, or the rishis in Hinduism, and the Fravashis are the celestial double, if you like, the equivalent of the archangel Michael in Christianity.
Yes.
But I really think, on the other hand, as I've said, whereas many people can talk about the cause of body and all of that, I think very few people have directly experienced it. Of course, we experience it inwardly, subjectively, but to really see it as an objective field, one has to be a very, very high state of being. And I give the example of the 3 shepherd girls of Fatima, that village in Portugal, and they were canonized. Is that the word? Yes, by Pope Francis. When they had the visitation of the Madonna on the 13th day of the month for 6 months, and they were imparted information on rather foreboding world events, World War II and the rise of communism. Now, why it was given to them, I have no idea.
What does this say about the nature of the future, then?
What it says about the nature of the future very much is that the world mind, what is happening, is already in the world mind. Mm-hmm. And the world mind is an enigmatic sort of thing. It doesn't mean it's predestined. But it's a two-way thing. If our behavior and our thoughts and actions are such that we will have to receive their natural recompense, that is in the world mind, and that will precipitate on the world's stage at the appointed hour.
Yeah, we are really at the edge of what we can think and express here.
Yes.
Especially if we don't experience it consciously.
Yes.
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 Fascinating. All right. So
the mortal vestures are the easier ones.
Yeah.
The physical body, we've dealt with that, and the intermediate, the astral body. But the Mayavi Rupa is a fascinating one, and again needs just a bit more explanation. I mean, I called it the dream body, the illusion body. The word in German is Doppelganger, and in French, perispirit, if I'm pronouncing French properly. So the Mayavi Rupa really pertains to the living person, and it's dual in function. It's both the vehicle of thought and the passions and desires. Now, the higher part of this illusory body, like everything, it has gradation. The higher part containing the spiritual elements, merges entirely after death into the higher nature. But the lower part of the Maya Virupa forms what's known as the desire body after death, which is the origin of spooks and phantoms and apparitions. But there is a lot of evidence of the Maya Virupa. One doesn't just talk about these things.
Yeah.
For example, from the great writers, T.S. Eliot, talking about the presence of another being next to him in his poem, The Wasteland. Who was that third person who walks beside me? The great explorer, Sir Ernest Shackleton, he described fully in his book, The Third Man Factor, opening heaven's doors. Then we're talking really of situations of people in tremendous danger when suddenly there was a materialization that warned them what to do and guided them towards safety. And when that was done, completely dematerialized. And the best scholarly book on that is by Edward Gurney, the English writer, that's not a good word, physiologist. And he collected hundreds of those cases and authenticated them. My favorite one is the great pianist Alice Summers, who, before she was taken to the ghetto concentration camp, she heard a voice saying, "Practice the Chopin etudes." Now, many people hear voices. Let's be clear about this. Anyone hearing a voice, it doesn't mean Maya Virupa or some higher entities contacting you for whatever nature. It's when the voice appears in a moment of extreme danger, extreme decision-making, or at very unusual times, shipwrecked soldiers, mountaineers, that kind of thing. And this great pianist heard the word "practice the Chopin etudes," which are about the most difficult pieces. And her performances of the etudes in the concentration camp saved her life. I mean, they really saved her life because of her concerts. So it's these completely unusual circumstances which indicate the presence of the Maya Virupa, which can be projected at will by an adept. Now, of course, hundreds of people are going to say, "I was in the war and no one came to my rescue." Well, yes, individual destiny is very individual.
I think it really pays to listen to you because these stories, when I hear them, and I've heard a few, not so many, maybe not so spectacular, they either fall in the camp of popular beliefs, popular culture, whatever, or maybe studied by parapsychology, but in a more kind of esoteric scientific way of doing it. But hearing them described and framed through these concepts of perennial philosophy, well, it's like a meal served in a different plate, right? Yes. No, really. I'm just listening because it's like, okay, wow. This is not something improvised, flippant. This
because
is well
so much
framed.
Evidence. Yeah. Mainstream science, of course, looks to materialistic arguments that mountaineers were sleep deprived or the white landscape made them hallucinate. But the point is, none of these materialistic arguments will ever display the veridical nature, veridical meaning happening in actual space and time at this moment in time with the detail.
Yes.
So the Maya Virupa is also associated with out-of-body experiences and lucid dreaming. I mean, these are wide terms. And my favorite example of that is Professor Arthur Ellison, who I knew so well for 30 years. He was thrice president of the Society for Psychical Research, professor at City University, visiting professor at MIT. I say all that because no one can say, you silly idiot, what you're talking about. He trained himself in lucid dreaming. And I once attended one of his courses, and he said in the out-of-body state, he decided to visit his local chemist shop and note the labels on the bottles. And the next day he went there and verified what he saw was accurate in the out-of-body state. So you can train yourself to project the Maya Virupa, the body of illusion, the body of thought.
And the word veridical here is so important, not just to
veridical
give it...
is very important.
Not just to give it validity, but also as a mystery. Like, how is this happening? My curious mind asks, how is this transition from one plane to another taking place? So it's the fact that it's taking place and how it may be taking place are both fascinating questions. And
in music, the best example is Schubert's Doppelganger. One of the most dark and dramatic songs in 2 pages.
Plus, maybe the third element is the fact that you can experience them sometimes.
Oh, yes, you can. You listen to that song and you're about as near as you get to experiencing it.
Wow.
You know what the song is about. No, I won't. That's all right.
Oh, no. Please go ahead.
Well, it's really, again, it shows the how the artist has access to these higher realms. But it was a song by Goethe. And Goethe had tremendous insight, of course. And it's the story of a young man who looks to the house of his former beloved, and he sees there a man mocking him. And that man is none other than his own double, mocking him and recounting his days of unrequited love. So one can, in moments of intense concentration, really project one's thought in such a way, and this is the song, but I've known people who've done this, one can project one's thought in such a way that there is a materialization. So the artist and the poet has as much to teach us. We talked about states of consciousness, unfolding consciousness. All of these impressions of the organs, physical and non-physical, we can call them states of consciousness. But let's recall, in my father's house are many mansions. I always get it the other way. I think there should be mansion and house anyway. In my father's house are many mansions. And Blavatsky put it so beautifully that if we trace all these non-physical psychic actions to the brain, it is only because in that mansion that we call the human body, the brain is the front door and the only one that opens out into space, into the external objective world. All the inner doors are internal, they are inner, and they open in the private building through which travel these transmitting agents of memory and sensation. So there is, as you were alluding earlier, transmission and communication. But again, this is the most important point I keep making, the clearness and the vividness of these transmissions depends on the health of the organs and the soundness of their state of being, the internal organs, the non-physical organs. Their clarity, their soundness, their health will better mirror the higher nature.
Yeah, an invitation for yoga in the widest sense. Yeah.
Yes, yoga, Tai Chi, Qigong, whatever you're drawn to.